I think we sometimes forget that the X-Men were originally teenagers. Despite the grand mythology the team and its many associates have built up over the years, the X-Men are originally an idea by Xavier to teach the next generation his values. Non-violence, coexistence, using their powers to earn mankind's trust rather than their animosity. And while his authority has been rightfully questioned throughout the years, and the team in its most well-known form was not a bunch of teenagers, books like The New Mutants, Generation X, and New X-Men continued the original book's basic premise. The idea was so simple. A bunch of teenagers who've been treated poorly by society or fear who they are rehabilitated through superheroics, coming to not only trust in their teammates as friends or more, but themselves and the mission they serve. That mission may be flawed, but it's a common goal that lets these teens and later adults keep living. It's why the mutant label is so malleable. Everyone at one point in their life has felt othered, left out, insecure, unsure where they're going. Despite everyone coming from different circumstances, that desire for acceptance and a life well lived is universal. And that's especially true for teenagers, who are trying to figure out who they're meant to be, not who they're told to be. This age-old struggle is embodied perfectly in 2024's Ultimate X-Men, written and drawn by Peach Momoko, managed by her husband Yomutsu, and script adapted by Zack Davisson. While this team has only started working for Marvel within the past decade or so, they've left an indelible impact. Their vision of the X-Men, while familiar in its focus on teens coming to terms with personal traumas and societal expectations, is so uniquely their own and at times so striking in its character work that I feel it personally deserves a spotlight among the current Ultimate Universe 2.0 Marvel is putting out. So I wanted to talk with one of the people behind the creation of the book, the work that goes into it, and what we as readers should expect going forward. And since I typically don't hear much about the process of translating and adapting Peach Momoko's raw dialogue into English for Western readers, I wanted to speak with someone else about some of the book's best aspects. So I hope this interview with script adapter Zack Davisson can help explain the genius behind Ultimate X-Men.
First things first, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be able to speak with you, Zach. It's a real honor to speak with any Eisner Award-winning person.
Thanks, Jordan. Thanks for inviting me. Happy to do it. Always.
Of course,
I like
of
the
course.
videos too when I watch them. They were very entertaining, very well informed. So,
well, thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a few questions for you. So,
shoot. Yeah, go for it.
Your start at Marvel is fairly interesting because you have a creative writing background, but you also have a few novels out. But those novels are specifically about yokai, Japanese folklore, ghost stories. You even have extensive essays on yokai and folklore for the comic Wayward by Jim Zub and Stephen Cummings. Now, I know you were part of the JET program for 8 years. You even ended up marrying a local celebrated sushi chef. So, of course, you're very familiar with Japanese culture, but where did that fascination start? Just a love of manga, wanting to learn more about the country where it's made, or something?
I mean, it's yeah, there's some of that as well. But I mean, for me, mostly, I mean, I had lived in Scotland previously, and I really enjoyed travel. I think this is the bigger thing, and I enjoyed the opportunity of there's just something that comes from living in a foreign country that is so different from just traveling somewhere. And at one point in my life, I was working at Amazon and I was a project manager and I was I was 33 years old and I just wasn't really happy with the way my life was going. So I was like, God, there's got to be something more than this. So I was looking for other opportunities like I'd done before with Scotland, a way to move and live in a foreign country. And I discovered the JET program and I was like, oh, I've always been interested in Japan, but I mean, I wasn't, I mean, I mean, this was back in the 90s and everything. So you got to understand that it wasn't the same world as it was now. There wasn't Japan stuff everywhere. There wasn't anime everywhere. I mean, I'd grown up reading anime and manga, of course. I think like a lot of people, but it was just it was so much more difficult to find than it was back then than it is now. But it wasn't really, I didn't really I wasn't like the big weeb who wanted to go to Anime Magic Land. It was really just a drive to go live in a foreign country again. And so, I applied to the JET program. I was thinking, well, I'll just go over there for like a year, and just do it again, just have some experience. And then once I got to Japan, I just fell in love with it so much. And I decided that I really, really wanted to learn the Japanese language because I'd always been interested in I'd always wanted to be bilingual. And I'd tried self-studying some other stuff and it was just never worked out. But when I got to Japan, I decided, you know what, I'm really going to make a go of this. I'm going to dedicate myself to learning Japanese. I'm going to try and learn as much about, integrate as much into the country as possible. And you didn't have to. There was a lot of Jets that went over there, never learned anything more than their basic Japanese, went home and had almost no effect on their life. It was just a fun thing that they did in their past. for those that are listening who don't know, the JET program is a government-sponsored program that will bring over people with college degrees to Japan and basically take you into schools where you ostensibly teach English, but you don't really. You're just mainly there to be a foreigner and interact with the kids and have a fun time. And the whole goal of the JET program, actually, as stated, is literally to bring people over to Japan, indoctrinate them with a love of Japan, then send them home to their home countries where they will then buy Japanese products forever. So it's like this weird little, like seriously, that is the whole goal of the Japanese program, is to create little Japanese ambassadors that will then, product ambassadors that will then grow up and become business people and, advocate for Japanese stuff. And honestly, considering how much of a boom Japan has had, I got to say, it's been a highly successful program. But yeah, once I was there, I just became so fascinated, decided I was really going to deep dive into it. And the other thing, like, I've always been interested in folklore. I've always been, like, when I was living over in Scotland, I did like a lot of research in local fairy legends because I just find it fascinating. And then when I hit Japan, it was just like hitting the mother lode. Like, they have so much folklore and so much of it, like, I didn't understand. It was just so much I didn't know about the country. Like, you walk around, you see these little statues everywhere. You're like, what is that? What does it mean? And like, this statue, someone put a sweater on. You're like, why did they do that? And this other statue is wearing a hat, and you're like, why did they do that? And I think it's interesting because a lot of the local people that I would ask these questions to did not know the answer. And that's pretty normal. Most of us live our whole lives in a culture never once thinking to ask why. We just accept that these are the way that things are done, especially when it comes to traditions and things that we do. This is how it has always been done. Like, why do you paint eggs at Easter? You're like, I don't know. We just do, and I found it, I always do, even with things like that, like in all sort of branches of folklore, I love finding the reason, because there is almost inevitably an actual reason as to why we do things if you look back far enough and you research hard enough. So I started doing that with Japanese folklore, mostly just because I wanted to know more for myself. And then when I, would learn something I found was fascinating, we had like a local newsletter. So I started writing a folklore column in our local newsletter. And then I expanded that out to writing for actual published magazines like Japan Zine and Kansai Time Out. And I would basically just, whenever I found something interesting, I would write about it. Like, I wrote one of the first articles in English on the Akigahara, or the suicide woods of Mount Fuji, because at the time I was teaching English at a forestry institute, because everyone who works in any sort of scientific profession has to know English, because that's the language of science. Whenever they go to conferences, whenever they write papers, it all has to be in English. So I was teaching English classes at this forestry institute, and they knew my interest in sort of like local legends and stuff. And so they were the ones who told me about, because they had a forest station, a research station at Akigahara. So they were telling me all these folklore and legends and like all this stuff that they'd experienced in there. And so I used that as the basis to write my article, The Suicide Woods of Mount Fuji, which I still, like I said, I think that's the first English language article that ever has been written on Akigahara. From there, I ended up getting my master's degree. I stayed in Japan for a long time. I decided I really enjoyed writing about this and decided to make that my life, essentially. So, yeah.
Fantastic.
The long and rambling origin story.
No, it's all fantastic information to know. Like, I did read some of the articles on your website, and I'm going to ask about one in particular.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're most famous for your work as a translator, specifically for classic manga like Gege no Kintaro, another yokai-related work.
It's interesting you should say that, because I have such a shattered career. Like, I have basically 3 jobs, and everyone knows me best for one of the 3 in a different realm. So like, what I'm most famous for depends on who I'm talking to more than anything else. Like, some people know me specifically for my academic work, and they don't even know that I work in comics. Some people know because I currently I'm a professor at NYU in their translation program. So like, some people know me for that. Some people know me mostly for my lecturing, because that's also something I do. Like, some people know me for manga, some people know me for American comics. So it is kind of I know it is kind of interesting to me, because I realize I have essentially 3 parallel careers that and that does confuse people sometimes, because most people, they want you to just be the one person who does the one thing. Like, people have a hard time with people who do multiple things, and they want to trap you in one path, even though I'm very much not a one path person. But yeah, I do like when I was, like, manga translation was something that I got into And I never really wanted to translate manga. What I did is I wanted to translate very specific people. Like I fell in love with Mizuki Shigeru when I was living in Japan. I was just like, I thought he was one of the most amazing human beings I'd ever seen in my life. Just easily one of the most incredible artists. So I decided that I was going to bring his work to the U.S. In fact, one time in Osaka, I got super drunk and stood on a table at my friend's bar, and I said, "I shall be the one to bring Mizuki Shigeru's work to the West." And I made this like solemn vow, and then
The most Osaka drunken promise you can make.
Oh yeah, yeah. I spent. This is actually my wife and I got married in this bar, the Rock in Japan.
Oh my god.
So, yeah, I love a good bar. But yeah, so that's how I started doing that like specifically because there's like different kinds of manga translators. There's like what I call like line translators, where they just accept whatever work they get, like whatever's plopped in front of them, they translate for the paycheck. And sometimes you like the work and sometimes you don't. It doesn't really matter. I really am in order to translate someone, I have to be super passionate about the artist. I have certain artists whose work I want to bring to the West, and that is basically how I do my translation. So if I translate something, you can be absolutely assured that it's something I'm personally passionate about.
Which also brings me back to what I was originally going to ask. You described in your Comics Journal article about translating being 40% Japanese ability, 60% English writing. And
absolutely.
So how did your experience as a translator and already working in the medium of comics as a translator prepare you for the Marvel method?
The thing about translation, this is something that's like if you don't get into the various area of translation, you wouldn't know this very much. But translation, like I said, it's mostly, if you're good at it, if you're really good at it, it's mostly a writing job. Your ability to read Japanese is not as important as your ability to write in English, because what you're doing, you're not reading, you're reading this sort of like text of what they want to do, and you're internalizing it, and then you're figuring out how to get that exact same like emotion expressed in English. If all you're doing is translating the words, you're failing as a translator. Your job is to translate the emotion, because what a reader did when the Japanese person wrote that, they weren't specific about the words to that extent. What they're trying to do is draw an emotional reaction from a reader. And so you need to learn how to figure out those exact, like how to make someone experience those same emotions in English, right? So that's what I mean when it's mostly, even like 60%, it might even be more than that. If you're a really good translator, you must be a good writer at the same time. Now in manga, especially historically, there was a greater demand for translation than there were for people who could write well. And so they would split those jobs. They would have a translator who would produce what they just called a raw translation. And it was just basically a translation of the book. These are the words. Then they would pass that translation over to a script adapter. And a script adapter's role is to rewrite the book in a way that is good in English, right? And most of the time, like a script adapter role is entirely a writer role. And so what they would do is they would just sort of take this raw translation and then they would rewrite it entirely in English. And most of the time, script adapters don't even know Japanese. And a lot of really famous writers got their original job or their original start in comics working as script adapters. Kelly Sue DeConnick probably being the most well-known of those. Like Kelly Sue DeConnick got her start working for Tokyo Pop as a script adapter. And I mean, it's because it's the same essential skill. It's learning. It's like, how do you use words to make someone feel emotion? Like that is really what it's about. And so, yeah, I write my own stuff and I translate stuff. And to me, the process is not amazingly different. It's still just about the manipulation of words. I mean, that's really what it's about. And the only difference really is like, what am I using as the raw material to sort of like construct this story and just to build this emotional set from. They do like sort of trigger different parts of the brain, and they bring different parts of satisfaction. But anything I translated and anything that I wrote myself, I mean, to me, they're equally like, they're my work, they're my emotional expressions and everything that are in there.
Which brings me to question 3, because it definitely, you mentioned in that same article some past reviews of Showa, a Japanese history, where people complained that you were given like a co-writer position when you didn't even come up with it, which is kind of...
Well, no, not co-writer, so that's a little different. It's author. because that's the different word. Is who is the author of a work is different from who is the writer. Like I think in comics, like the artist is equally the, if not more, the author of the comic than the writer is, right? And so in terms of comics, that can get really tricky because we have these different words. We have like author, we have writer. Um, and when you go to a core level, what do they mean? Like, what does the word of someone who authors a work actually mean versus someone who writes and illustrates a work? And that can get to be a really tricky part. Where people got really upset is because of Amazon, and it had nothing to do with me or anything. So Amazon does not have categories for writer and illustrator. They have categories for author. And so when your credit appears on the Amazon page, you appear in the about the author section of Amazon, which I have, and people would get mad at me about that as if I had some sort of control over Amazon, as if I could go into Amazon.com, rewrite the entire code of their system to, and I don't know, I mean, that's just one of those things where anytime you do this, people get mad at you for stuff personally you have no control over. And then I would point out, I'm like, well, look at Caleb Cook, who does My Hero Academia. He's also listed as the author, but you don't get mad at him, you know. I don't know. People on the internet are weird.
Oh yeah.
But I do, yeah. But and that's the thing. It's like I said in the article, and I thought this was the important point that people miss. Is I like, to me, it is one of my works. But that's to me. It doesn't have to mean to everyone else. I'm not demanding that all of you see it that way. It's like me saying, like, to me, my wife is the most beautiful woman in the world. And that's true because it's a personal statement of emotion. That is to me. It doesn't mean that I demand everyone else view it that way. It's just that I have a personal emotional attachment to these works that I expect no one else to understand, or I do not care if you understand about that or not. It does not matter. It's just, this is a personal statement of personal emotion is what I was talking about there. But people just, they get upset about things. That's fine.
Yeah. So on that specifically, because you mentioned like script adapter and then like co-scripter, co-writer, you are listed as script adapter for Ultimate X-Men. But back in Demon Days and Demon Wars, you were listed as co-scripter. And so like, needless to say, there's a little confusion as to the general amount of like input you have. So I have to ask, how much of the words on the page are you, and how much of that is just Peach's raw words that she?
Yeah, and that's it's once again, it's difficult to tell. So like when I first started working for Marvel, I mean, like, I've known Peach for years. Like I met Peach when she was sitting, like, I literally met her at Rose City Comic Con, where she was sitting at her own little booth and she had her own little self-published comic, and she was just sitting there and everyone was walking right by her, ignoring her. And I thought she was great. So I went up and talked to her and we got to be friends, and that would have been 2015.
Wow.
And, I mean, since then we just always stayed in touch because she was living in Portland at the time, and then she moved back to Japan. And I just always really wanted to do a comic with her. Like we were like, let's work together, let's do something. And so at one point in time, we were in really serious discussions to do a comic that I was super excited about, and it was going to be me, and it was going to be Peach Momoko, and it was going to be Mike Mignola, and we were going to do Hellboy in Japan. And so the three of us had this awesome chain going, and like Peach had done preliminary artwork, and we had like put together a pitch package for Mike, and he was super into it. And it so happened that all three of us were going to be at a comic convention at the same time. So we were going to have a meeting and we were going to have an official thing. And that ended up being Emerald City Comic Con 2019, which was canceled because of COVID. And so that never happened. And that just sort of like went away. That just vanished. Mike Mignola being somewhat mercurial, once he has moved on, he's moved on. Then that he moved on. That didn't happen. We never got to have the meeting. So that just kind of vanished from under us. And it was a bummer because we were like, oh, well, I guess we won't do this. I mean, it was super exciting. Me and Peach were finally going to do our thing together. And then out of nowhere, this was another, like a lot of stuff in comics just comes out of nowhere. So Peach was at another comic convention, and there was another artist there. God, I can't remember his name. Andre Elizondo, something like that. I don't remember exactly who it was. But anyways, he also saw Peach and thought his stuff was really good. CB Cebulski at the time was the Marvel talent scout, and so he went over to CB Cebulski and said, "Hey, you should take a look at this Peach Momoko person." And CB went over, and CB Cebulski also, by the way, is a former person on the JET program. Speaks fluent Japanese, great guy, really likes CB a lot. He went over and basically just like saw Peach, and he's like, I could do something with that, you know. And so he got, you know, he hired Peach on Marvel, and to do, you know, what, like originally just a bunch of covers and stuff, and she was one of their original Stormbreaker people. And then it came time for Peach to do her comic for Marvel, and then they reached out to me, which I was always just funny because I remember getting an email in my inbox from CB Cebulski, and I'm like, well, this has got to be a scam. You know, someone's got to be lying to me. And I went there and I double checked the address, and I did all this stuff, you know, because he also knew of me, which I didn't know that he knew of me. You know, it's always, and this is one of the things I tell people a lot. Like in comics, it's not, when it comes about networking, it's not about who you know, it's about who knows you, because they have to be, and CB knew who I was. So he pulled me together and said like, hey, we really need help with Peach Momoko, because she's a great artist, and she's never really been a writer, and she doesn't know how to do dialogue at all. So so they brought me on. And for Demon Days, I essentially scripted all the dialogue. Like Peach would turn in dialogueless pages, and I would go through and dialogue them all. And that's how we did Demon Days and Demon War. And I also, like, one of the things that they had asked me originally is that Peach also doesn't know the Marvel Universe at all. So she doesn't even know. She just like, so my job was also to sort of like Marvel Universe it, to make it feel like, our editor Lindsay used to always say, it's like Peach makes comics, Zack makes them Marvel comics, because I understood.
Really cool.
Yeah, because I understand, because I've been a comic reader all my life. You know, I have an X-Men #1 signed by Stan Lee. I've been like, I'm a dedicated, and I used to own a comic shop at one point in time, actually. So
Wow.
I mean, I'm super into Marvel comics, and I was able to bring that sort of like Marvel comics touch to Peach Momoko's comics that she's not able to bring. When we ended up, and like my first, I forget what my first credit was. I don't know. I'm trying to remember what it was. Like there was a whole debacle about there's like, how do I get credited as? Because, I mean, you know, they're Peach's comics. I mean, she is the driving force behind all of it. You know, I have had a few like some story inputs here and there on character and stuff like that, but mostly they're her comics, and I'm playing the supporting role. You know, I like to say that it's like I'm playing bass guitar for Taylor Swift. I mean, that's basically how it is going there, you know, and so that is my job. But then, you know, but I also want them to be good comics, and you know, I bring that same sensibility that I do to any of my writing, whereas I want these emotional reactions from readers. And so that can often bring a lot of like Peach and I do an immense amount of back and forth. Like we will fight for like 5 or 6 emails over a single word. And one of the things I think is to the strength of me and Peach's relationship is that we have ability to absolutely fight with each other, like just completely. Like people don't know what goes behind the scenes, because Peach will want something to like, oh, I want this. I'm like, look, Peach, first of all, no one in America will get that reference. Absolutely no one. Like we have to explain this to them, because that is not this cultural thing that you think is super emotionally powerful has absolutely no impact here. Or I'll put something else in, and Peach is like, well, I don't get that. I'm like, well, you don't get that because you don't understand what I'm trying. Like, you know, my classic example of that is she didn't know that Nightcrawler goes Bamf. And so when I put Bamf in there, she was like, well, this is stupid. I'm like, just Peach, come
Just
on.
roll with it.
Yeah, you got to just trust me sometime here, buddy. And when Ultimate X-Men came around, after she'd done Demon Days, you know, she wanted more influence over the dialogue. And I was like, well, that's fine. You know, so now she sends me, because she really didn't do any dialogue previously. She liked this idea, and most of her stories pre-Marvel were entirely wordless. Like if you see her stuff she did for heavy metal and everything, that's what she likes doing. She likes doing this stuff where the art carries 100% of the story. But so she started doing more dialogue, and then I will basically go through and take like, so I feel like my role in this is more a classic scripted after role, where I'm taking what she wants and then I'll rewrite it entirely from there. But I also add a lot of new dialogue, like I'll like, you know, so it ends up being old school Marvel method in that way, because she'll have scenes where she'll have like entire pages with no dialogue, but the characters' mouths are going, and I'm like, Peach, you didn't. This person is clearly saying something here, and so I'll have to add in all of this dialogue and things like that. And you know, and then once again, it just becomes this enormous back and forth situation where and that's why, you know, like when I talk about myself, and like sometimes, you know, I'm like, well, I do co-write the book in that sense, especially in the fact that we do all this sort of back and forth stuff. And that's something that makes it really unique with what I do with Peach, which is different from a manga script adapter, because a manga script adapter, you just rewrite the book. The original artist has no say whatsoever. There's no dialogue, there's no conversation. Whereas Peach and I are constantly in conversation about the way of the way it goes. And even like the way, like one of the main things that I do is I basically created the personality for a lot of the characters, because Peach's dialogue, when she puts it in, it's all very matter of fact. It's like, you know, she doesn't add a lot of emotion and character to her dialogue because it's just not her real strength. So like I gave May a different personality. Like when I was doing Nico Momoro, I decided that to balance out the team, we needed this sort of like aristocratic sort of like, you know, that sort of character. And so those are all definitely my touches to the series. You know, I think that like Peach did an interview with the web channel Comics Tropes, where she sort of outlined our process, and I thought that she said it perfectly, where like, because she also doesn't work from a script. She literally just gets a page open and she writes the story as she draws it, because that's kind of how her brain works. So she'll do it, she'll get the dialogue in, and then, as she said, and then Zack adds his voice. And that's kind of how I think about it too. So like she'll give it to me, and then I'll add my voice to it, and I'll layer that extra aspect onto it. And that ends up after the fight, because that's when the fight begins. So I'll send in my script, and then it's like gloves on, battle time, and Peach and I go at it. And once we're both happy with the final script, then that's what gets out.
That's fantastic.
So, yeah, it's hard to say what percentage it is, because you're basically like two cooks in the same kitchen throwing ingredients in, and the other cook's like, no, not that, too much salt, no, blah 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 blah. At the end, I couldn't really tell you what percentage it is. All I know is that it's very much, especially like the plot is all Peach, the dialogue is very much a duet between me and Peach. You know, like the two of us doing it together.
That's I honestly had a lot to take in, but it's all it's honestly fascinating to learn about. But let's talk about the work itself, because I truly do adore where this series is going. But I also love references to the past work you've done with Peach. Issue 11's confrontation with Kanon and Hisako harkens back to Kirisaki Mountain from the Momoko-verse, the Samurai Sai, the Legends of the Oni. Even drinking blood to gain power for the mutants is almost like a reference to that, with the drinking the power of the Oni.
100%.
And it manages to not only fit into the narrative well, given how mutant powers are kind of displayed as like almost like spiritual in the beginning, but without that foreknowledge, it still serves as like a neat piece of world building. Are there other references from that past canon we'll be seeing in later issues of Ultimate X-Men, like a version of Kuroki or Logan the Wolf? Or is it mainly just throwaway bones for the fans that have been with you for this long?
You know, I mean, that's a great question and an interesting point. So like Peach is so single-minded and focused, and she just wants to do Peach Momoko comics. She wants, you know, like, I mean, to us internally, it is all part of the same, like, if you want to call it the Momoko-verse, it is all the same thing. Like Ultimate X-Men is an extension of Demon Days to us, you know, and that's how we approach it. So like, and a lot of that stuff I throw in, like calling it Kirisaki Mountain, like little references like that, like I'll put those in because I think they're fun, because I like comic book Easter eggs, and like it sparks joy for me to add those little things in there. So a lot of that comes from me. You know, we had a discussion at the start where we were like, well, how much are we going to tie this in to what we did in Demon Days? Are we going to use these same things? And I was just like, let's go for it. You know, let's do it, you know, because that's kind of spiritually how I see it. And like, yeah, you know, when we first started doing this comic, people were constantly being like, oh, when are the real X-Men? When is it gonna? And I kept telling people constantly, it's like, just never. If you're waiting for this suddenly to become another Marvel comic, you are going to die waiting. Like, these characters that we have, they're never going to suddenly, you know, like, you're never going to suddenly see the real X-Men in there. You know, we just have the story that we want to tell, and we're just focused 100% on telling that story. And Marvel, to their credit, have been perfectly willing to just let us go. There's been no editorial command that we have to use these characters, or we have to make these tie-ins, or that we have to do these things. Like, Marvel editorial has been perfectly content to give us an absolute like just blank path, what we want to do. And I thought that was great because um, yeah, I mean, I guess it's our first in continuity series, and I wasn't sure how, if that was going to have a heavier hand on us or not. I mean, as for how much more Demon Days stuff we'll bring in, like, I don't know. I mean, I like don't expect any. What is in the series is what is in the series. Don't expect any sudden like radical surprise shifts. Like we have a story we're telling. We're currently working on 18, so you can expect just a continuation of the current story. There's no plan on suddenly like issue 20 to suddenly like peel off the layers and have
Mariko
Sim,
show up, and she's like,
Mariko
I
show
have
up or Logan or anything like that, because that's not the story we're trying to tell. We're trying to tell a story of these characters. We've established and built these characters, so it would be kind of pointless for us to then suddenly say like, oh, we're actually not telling the story of these characters. We're gonna like, I don't know. Yeah. And it's kind of tough for me sometimes to hear that from people when I see that online. I'm so like, is not the story and the characters we're using, are not they good enough? Do you always, and I think that's a difference with Marvel Comics maybe a little bit, or Marvel Comics readers, is they're constantly trained for the big reveal. They're constantly trained for the shock. They're constantly trained to expect this moment where the mask comes off and, oh my God, it's Robert Downey Jr. as Doom. They're so prepped for that. And that is not what we're doing. We're telling an emotional story of these characters. And so there'll never be the time where the mask is suddenly ripped off and you're looking at, this surprise character who wasn't in there all along. That's just not our style of story we're telling. Which I hope I hope it's not a disappointment to people. But, that's like, I hear a lot of people say, oh, it's such a slow burn. And I'm like, yeah, 100% it's a slow burn. Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah. It is paced the way it is paced, because it's not like a lot of other Marvel comics, they're paced like they're constantly on the verge of cancellation is how I feel it. So they just have to constantly keep feeding that adrenaline, constantly keep having to feel that adrenaline. And I think that's kind of a shame, because I think if you compare, manga stories, like Japanese comic stories versus some of the Marvel stories, they have such a slower and more deliberate pacing. And I think that's something, when people say that Ultimate X-Men is manga-esque, which I think is silly. But I don't think it's not the art style, it's the pacing. It's that ability to tell a slow and deliberate story versus this constant need for something to happen. I'm like, nothing happened this issue. I'm like, what do you mean nothing happened this issue?
There's characters stuff happening, bro.
Yeah. This character got sad. This character, all this stuff is happening.
Natsu killed her mom.
I know, right?
That's honestly that's great to hear. That degree of separation, like, I didn't want to ask anything about like, oh, did you talk to Chris Condon about Ultimate Wolverine? I didn't want to ask anything like that. Yeah, you guys are off in your own world, and you guys you are far better for that.
The one real hard part I have to say is that someone, I forget who it is, someone's putting May in their comic, and Peach and I are both incredibly nervous about that. It's hard to let your children go to someone else. And I actually had to have a little emotional heart-to-heart with my buddy Jim Zub, because he's like, first time it happens, man, it's rough. Like, first time you've invested something, you've created this character, but you just that's part of working in Marvel continuity, is the ability for people to do that, and yeah. I mean, but that's just part of the deal. Someone else wants to use May, and we're just like whatever they do in that series should have absolutely no impact whatsoever on what we're doing, because ultimately the story we're trying to tell is a single driven story. And when it ends, when they get the trade paperback collection, I want a story that you can pick up the trade and you can flip page 1 and you can read all your way through, and then you can flip page, the final page, and you have a satisfying story. And in the middle of that, I don't want suddenly a shocking reference to a comic that something else happened where the readers are like, what the hell, that takes you out of the story. So, I mean, my goal is just simply never reference anything else that happens anywhere else, because that way you have a full, complete story at the end.
And it's really funny because other books are going out of their way to actually reference, at least vaguely, what's happening in your book. And
are they?
Yeah, they are.
I didn't even know that. Oh, that's funny.
They're referencing a lot about mutant kind and blood drinking and just kind of everything with the children of the atom. It's
no way. Really? Is it?
Yeah. I've seen that in Ultimate Black Panther and a little bit in Ultimate Spider-Man. It's there. So everybody else is clearly building around what you and Peach are doing. And I find that so like not I don't want to say insular, but it's so separate, so isolated from everything else, and it's in those personal touches that you both bring definitely make it my favorite out of the line. So I'm like, yeah, let's talk about May, because I think that's the character that's like won the hearts of everybody.
Oh, May's awesome. Yeah, love it. Yeah.
We all love May Storm. But that's also due to your dialogue choices. Her confrontation with like Surge in issue 9 is like a big shift in her character, because she goes from like a troubled teen with superpowers to a bona fide leader to some degree. And while she already shows some difference in how she speaks when she has her mask on, will we see her way of speaking change over time as well? Will she scream more special moves like she does in Hisako's Mind Palace?
That's also something that is really difficult to. I mean, I tried to convey this as much as possible, but it's a very distinct Japanese culture. Like, this is also something to Peach. It is really important that these characters are honest and representative of actual Japanese teenagers, because she's like, so many times you see Japanese teenagers, especially done in Marvel comics, they're done by people who have never lived in Japan. So they're stereotypes of what they think Japanese teenagers are. So she wants a really serious Japanese teenager. And part of our thing with Maystorm, which I tried to convey in the dialogue, and which some people who know recognize this instantly. So May grew up as a huge fan of the TV show Kamen Rider. So she loves Kamen Rider. And Kamen Rider, when he puts on his mask, he talks like a hero, you know? Yeah. And so when May puts on her mask, she starts talking like what she thinks a hero should talk like, which is Kamen Rider. And so Kamen Rider shouts out like, you know, the Fubiki kick and things like that. So because that is May's stereotype of a hero. And so she's trying to live up to what she thinks a hero should do. And that's why when she puts on the mask, her dialogue and her personality changes. And that's entirely because of her childhood growing up as an influence of what a hero means, being Kamen Rider.
That's fantastic to hear as a Kamen Rider fan.
Yeah. Yeah, all of that is in universe, and you know, and very deliberate in our choices. You know, that choice for May is that she does start off as like sort of like this sort of like, you know, someone who doesn't know where she is or lost her way, and she needs to move up, you know, this sort of like hero's journey to become this leader. And she does that by finding inspiration in what were her childhood heroes, which is Kamen Rider. So yeah.
I have a small question. Do you have any just general experience with Kamen Rider? Like,
I mean, I had not childhood experience, because once again, when I was a kid, that stuff just didn't exist,
that wasn't,
you know,
there yet.
Yeah, it wasn't there. I saw a little bit of it, but not very much. I came to it much later in life, you know. I was frankly too old when Power Rangers came out, so I was 21, 22, so I wasn't sitting at home watching Power Rangers, you know. But yeah, I have watched it as an older person. I do love it. I mean, obviously, Kamen Rider's great. The Sentai Rangers are all great. So I have enough fluency in that in order to replicate it. But I mean, my main thing was Godzilla. I absolutely love Godzilla. I've watched every Godzilla movie.
You're a man of taste. So, you're a man of culture.
Yeah.
So how does it feel? Because you've talked about like the differentiation of voice, especially for like Nico and like May just now. Like, how does it feel writing such a large cast of characters that continues to keep growing with like every issue? Do you find to come up with like ways for them to speak, like to differentiate character voices, or is it like helpful that a lot of these characters are completely original or B to C-listers, and because of that, there's no preconceived notion on how they should speak?
That's another interesting thing. I heard someone else say B to C-listers, and I think that's just an interesting, because I've never approached it that way. So basically, the other way that the way that Peach approaches it is she'll come up with like prototypes of characters that she wants. She like wants a magic girl. She wants like this. And so then we'll look at the existing Marvel universe and see if there's a character that kind of fits that. And then we just basically layer that skin over. So like Peach isn't like, I want to work with Nico Maru. She's like, I want a magic girl. And like, are there any Japanese teenage magic girls in the Marvel universe? Here's one. Okay, bam. Now you're Nico Moro. She's like, I want this. Then it'll be like someone else. Like, I want this other. Like, I want this other character. Does that character not exist? Okay, now you're a new character. But we never think of them in terms of C-listers or B-listers. I just think of them in terms of like, because we wanted a cast that was set at a Japanese school. Okay, you said a Japanese school. Every character has to be Japanese. That's fundamental. You're not going to find any non-Japanese people at a Japanese school, or if you do, they'll be exceedingly rare. We wanted them to be a little group of Japanese schoolgirls. That is very prototypically Japanese. In Japan, boys and girls tend not to mix. You don't see mixed groups of friends. You don't see you don't see the Stranger Thing where you've got boys, girls, all this other stuff mixing together as a single friend group. Simply does not happen in Japan. Girls always get friends with girls, boys always get friends with boys. So that is highly representative of Japanese culture. So we needed Japanese schoolgirls, of a certain age. And then we just went and farmed to see what characters fit that, what characters could go in there. And there was a couple hands-off characters where they're like, oh, you can't use these because they're being used in other series. Like, okay, no problem at all, But yeah, but like in that terms, like some people were like, oh, you're using obscure characters. I'm like, I just didn't really I don't think of them as obscure characters. I don't think of them as B or C listers. I think that they're the characters that fit the story we wanted to tell. And some of it, like a lot of it is like, there's certain subtle aspects to it that I bring in, from my own experience as well. It's like I'm a fencer, so that's my sport. I fence competitively. And so Canon is a trained fighter because she does kendo. And so she talks and fights differently from, for example, Surge, who is just a street brawler. And so I try to bring those two different aspects to it. Like, hopefully you see someone who actually has training and control and knows how to fight versus someone who's simply like Noriko, who's a street brawler and a gutter punk, and bring those like sort of like little subtle aspects to them, I don't know if they come off as well as I'd like them to, but I hope so. But
no, I definitely see it in canon, especially.
Yeah, and just bringing all those different parts of the personality to it, like you just have to I think you just have to fall in love with every character. In order to do their voice, you just have to really love the character. You have to, at least for me, like I just have to be emotionally invested and figuring out how they speak and how they talk. And, like we did that with Futaba, obviously, who is our rogue analogy, and I wanted her to talk differently because one of the things that is in Japan, there's tons of regional accents, like just absolute tons of regional accents. So it wouldn't make sense in a comic set in Japan for everyone to have the same regional monotone accent. That just wouldn't make sense. It would be like setting a comic in Britain and not having like a Scottish character or someone, because like you have this mix. So you don't have a mix. They're all going to be Japanese, but they'll all have regional accents. So I wanted Futaba to have a sort of like more regional accent. And of course, I gave her like a slight little hint to her rogue origin.
Some y'alls here.
Yeah,
and
a few y'alls in there, but that's not supposed to be a representative of a Southern accent. That's supposed to be representative of a Japanese rural accent that also absolutely exists in Japan.
I remember seeing a tweet where you corrected somebody saying that it was a Kansai accent and that was just a general lazy stereotype.
Yeah, and it's not, and even her, like, she doesn't have a Kansai accent because Kansai doesn't actually exist in that area, so it's more supposed to be representative, just like a more, like probably even like a Hiroshima accent or something, but like something like that. But yeah, it was people like, yeah, and that is always, doing accents is hard because when you do them, the person who is actually of that accent will then, unless you know that immensely, you'll never be able to get it right. But I definitely disagree with the idea of you can't sub a one-for-one accent. Like you can't sub a Kansai accent for a Southern accent any more than you can sub a Kansai accent for a Scottish accent. Like it makes no sense. They are regionally bound. But I'm not trying to give her a Southern accent. I'm trying to give her just a unique accent that represents the flavor of language that you would hear spoken in Japan.
And she still sounds smart and like well educated
as
well. Like you manage to balance that really well, and it makes Futaba an interesting character because you say she's a rogue analog, but she's very much not like her at all.
No,
and that makes me even more interested to see her general direction and like just the same thing with Canon's brother. Like their whole subplot together, it's interesting.
And that's one thing where people like, especially when we brought in people like Natsu, they're like, oh, that's the ultimate Cyclops. I'm like, it's totally not. Scott Summers could still be running around there somewhere. None of our characters should be considered the ultimate version of blah, 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 blah. They are simply who they are. Except for maybe some of the direct ones like Noriko and Nico Robin. Okay, those two are the ultimate version of those characters, but the rest of them, like what I find really interesting is that there's the least amount of speculation around one of my favorite characters, who is Mory. Like Mory plays such an absolute integral part.
I was going to ask.
Yeah. Mory makes such an integral part to the entire plot of the story, and nobody ever says anything about her. And I think that's so interesting.
So can I ask my question about Mory? Because she's like, I know you can't reveal anything. I know you can't. The book is still ongoing. You still have some stuff to do. Will we ever know what her actual powers are?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And Mory was something that like Peach and I think Mory was where I had the most creative input into the story because like a lot of things with characters with Peach will just throw in a design and try to figure out what the character is later. And I will say the one thing with Mory that I can reveal and I think will not ruin too much, hopefully, is that I was like with Peach, I'm like, look, Peach, not every character has to be some sort of analog of an existing character, an existing power. It is fine for us to add something completely 100% new to the Marvel universe that has no anchor in anything else. That not every character needs to be this, something like that. And so that is what Mory is. And Mory is, I mean, she is. I don't want to talk too much about it. She's awesome. I love Mory, and I think
She's been such a good part of the team, and she
Yeah.
like, even if she isn't fighting, she's like an emotional anchor for Natsu. She's
Yep.
involved in everything with Minoru. She's a good character.
She's a massive part. Yeah, she's a massive part of the story, and she's the part of the story that almost no one cares about. And I love that because it'll be even better. I mean, I guess I should say like we don't have any big reveals. There is some reveals there, but yeah.
The only indication we get is her getting like a psychic vision, I think in issue 17.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just like because of a wide distribution of like psychic energy. So like, yeah,
she's awesome though. I love Mory.
I do too. Yeah. So obviously, given that question, I have to ask, who is your favorite character to write for in the series?
I really like doing Nico's dialogue. I find her dialogue really satisfying to write because she writes in what I would consider to be the way someone who is in high school who is smug and thinks they're better than everyone else goes out of their way to talk in a sort of elevated affectation of language and uses different like more what they consider to be smart word choices but that are really unnatural and still affected because she's going out of her way to try and seem superior to everyone else. So I think that's a lot of fun to write with Nico's dialogue. It's been fun and challenging bringing in Futaba's dialogue. I mean, it's hard to say, honestly, like, I think of all of them, my favorite characters definitely are Mory and Nico. Like, those are my two favorites. And, like, Nico's the only one, like, the battle I got to do between Noriko and Nikomaro was so much fun to write that dialogue. Like, I loved being able to do that because I finally got to bring out the side of Nico where she's just like this complete
mug asshole.
Yeah, just a mean girl. She is just absolutely the complete and utter mean girl who is just not only attacking Noriko physically, but attacking her emotionally. Like she is using her words to just break her down and shatter her. And that was really fun to write, to be cruel. I loved it because like we every now and then our editor's notes will come up and like after we finished that series, we wrote it up and our editor's like, did you guys just make me feel sorry for Noriko? You bastards. They're like, yes, we did.
My God, that's so good. That's so good. So I have like two more questions.
Mm-hmm.
Given your experience with writing back matter in Demon Days and Wayward, the back matter is quite different for Ultimate X-Men. A lot of it is like concept art and doodles done by Peach of specific Japanese cultural ideas and like stuff that you're explaining for the first time, presumably for a Western audience. So how does getting to look at the little things in Japanese culture that you like got to experience and got to indoctrinate yourself into feel now that you're like trying to explain that through a major publication like Marvel? And would you ever love to expand on some of them, or like have you suggested some for Peach to draw in any case?
Yeah, I mean, and most like when we first started doing Demon Days, like because I do that for Usagi Jimbo currently. I write back matter for Usagi Jimbo also. I did it for Wayward. And when we started doing Marvel, like for Demon Days, I was like, because I was like, well, can I write yokai files for all the characters? Because I showed them, I'm like, I have done yokai files, for all of these different series. Like, I think they're fun and I think readers like them. And so Marvel was like, sure, go for it. So, that started with Demon Days. And then when we started doing Ultimate X-Men, there was this one specific plot point, and oh my God, Peach and I just like fought over this so much. Like this was probably our biggest battle that we ever fought, where in Japan on graduation day of middle school, if a boy likes a girl, he'll take the second button off of his coat because that is the button that is closest to your heart, and he will give it to the girl as a token of I have a crush on you. And so getting that second button on graduation day is a big thing in Japan. It's like the romance thing, like, oh, is any boy gonna, give you the second button, all this other stuff. And so Peach wrote this scene in there, and I had to explain to Peach, I'm like, well, no one will understand this. So I'm adding in dialogue, explaining in stories like, oh, some boy gave you a second button. That means he loves you. And Peach is like, that's not natural. No Japanese person would say those words because we all know what it means.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't have to say like, no person would be describing. It'd be like I use this example a lot. Like if you have a character in an American story on Christmas and they wake up and their stocking is full of gifts, that character would not then look at that stocking full of gifts and say, oh my gosh, the stocking that I hung on the wall in anticipation of Santa coming has been filled with toys, showing that I have been good. For if I were not a good child over the year, Santa would not have filled my stocking with toys. Like that kind of exposition text can come off as really false, but it's also sometimes extremely necessary. And so the compromise for that was just like, well, why don't we just do culture notes in the back? And if you do culture notes in the back on these sort of things, then you don't need to explain it in the story. So that's kind of how that all started. And from there, like Peach just enjoys doing them. So, she'll just pick stuff she wants to do. And I'm like, it's all good. I think they're fine. I'm glad that people really enjoy stuff like that. Honestly, I think that's great. It's been really made me really happy to see people responding to those aspects of it. So
yeah, even the little stuff like explaining what coffee jelly and Neapolitan spaghetti is, like those are just little things, and I'm just like, this is it brings me right back to Kyoto.
Yeah, dorky little stuff, that I think is fun, and like I said, I think it's awesome, because part of it, part of Ultimate X-Men is to try and show people real Japan rather than, this sort of like imitation of Japan, because especially even nowadays, because people have become so interested in Japan, and it's just the interest in Japan, the transition of it has been phenomenal to watch over my lifetime since I started, translating comics back in the 2000s and everything to where it is now. So yeah, but I'm glad that Marvel once again, they've been just really nice and basically letting us do whatever we want and add those little touches in. So
I have one last question for you.
Yeah.
And this is obviously going to be a loaded question.
Yeah,
so
no, all good. Yeah.
What is the book about to you? Not to Peach, specifically to you.
To me, the book is about processing of trauma in various different ways, but especially about the processing of trauma as it's experienced. Like I said, like, there's different ways that people culturally process trauma. In Japan, people simply internalize this trauma and they're expected to eat it. There's not a lot of like mental health services. There's not a lot of like you see all this stuff in the US where there's like, it's okay to feel bad. You just don't get that in Japan. Japan is very is not an emotionally expressive country, and that's something that can be shocking to people because they're like, but people cry all the time in anime, and
but like, that's anime.
They also fly all the time in anime, they also shoot magic bolts, this is an expression of fantasy. So Japanese people tend to be, very non-expressive, and they tend to like just super like process this trauma quite a bit. And to me, that is what the series is about. It's about these characters who have been traumatized and how they internally process this trauma, and then how that trauma is then sort of like externally shown through their powers, because everyone's powers are somehow an expression of their trauma, right? Like that's these mutant powers are, I mean, I guess they're mutant powers, but they're also, they're all built, they all come from some sort of seed like that,
Misako's is a shell protecting her. May is lashing out.
May is the ability to lash out and just like cause, to force this pain that other people have. And then you have others who are jealous of their ability to do this, who want these powers that don't have them. And that's like, and then like Noriko, obviously Surge, she's had a really hard life, and so she's trying to she wants to be someone like May, but she's not able to because she's a little too wounded and a little too shattered, and is not able to process her trauma in a way that will allow her to externalize it.
And
But yeah,
Shinobu's just drenched in trauma the entire time, and he's falling deeper into it.
And he's just like sucking further and further into his own trauma. I mean, so that's basically what I think to me, what Ultimate X-Men is about. It's this sort of like emotional dirge, I guess. Yeah. And I think, like that's the other thing I think with Ultimate X-Men, and this is just to go off on another tangent, but a lot of people will try and say, oh, it is like this. It is like, I see people all the time like saying, oh, Peach Momoko is doing a Junji Ito comic. I'm like, no, she is not even slightly.
That's not at all what it's about.
It's that you only have this one frame of reference, but that has nothing to do with our story. We're not trying to do a Japanese horror story. We're not trying to do any of that stuff. We're trying to tell a unique story from unique creators who want to do something, that expresses the story they want to tell, rather than, oh, it is this in Marvel, it is this in Marvel. I think people just are trying to constantly, because maybe the story is so unfamiliar, they're trying to cling for something to make it familiar. They're trying to like pull something in, but it's not, and that's my plea to readers, is just let it be what it is. Stop trying to make Ultimate X-Men into something else. Allow something new to be born into the universe without constantly feeling the need to strap it to something else, or make it something else. Like, it is entirely new. And it was a gamble too. Like, I remember when I met with Will Moss in San Diego Comic-Con, they were just like, this could have absolutely failed. I mean, this shows what I find really amazing about Marvel is that they are 100% able and willing to take risks of this magnitude. That they, because, like I've heard a few people say, it's like, oh, it's not an X-Men title. It's not. I'm like, of course it is. It's just that it's about the core emotion of the X-Men. It's not about the characters. It's not about Wolverine and Cyclops and who does Jean Grey love. I mean, that's part of the X-Men, but at the same time, if you think of it more of this idea of, hurt teenagers, and everything, and like manifesting.
It like draws all the way back to Jack Kirby and like Stan's just original vision to an extent.
Yep.
And it's something I really loved about this. It really brought back like the core of X-Men in such a way that it was fresh. It's exciting. And like you said, there's like no familiar frame of reference to grab onto. So you're just here for the ride.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a great ride, and it's going to go to some great conclusions, and that's frankly all praise to Marvel for allowing us to do this, because they could have very easily have said, no, you guys need to align. You need to make a reference to, Ultimate Hoobie Boob or whatever it is. Like, the maker needs to show up at some point and go, hee. Like, they have done none of that to us. They have just simply said, all right, you guys have a clear vision. Go. We will clear all the traffic out of your way and just let you drive. And Marvel has just been absolutely supportive and amazing of that in every single way they could be. Something you don't really expect from a company like Marvel. So, and I heap tons of praise on that for CB Cebulski also, for having the ability to see creators and the vision to step out of their way, I guess, and it's been great.
Well, it's been great having to speak with you, Zach. You've answered all my questions and more. It's been a real pleasure.
Awesome.
So thank you.
Look forward to what happens to Mory, because I tell you, it is going to be awesome.
And thank you guys for watching. I really want to do more of these kinds of interviews with creators, talk about the craft that goes into their work and the experiences of getting it out. That's really about it. Thanks for watching.